Hi everyone! Welcome again to our webinar program. This is the 7th webinar of our webinar series 2019. The topic of our webinar today is Assessment for Student Learning. We are going to explore 3 talking points about assessment for student learning. These are: what is assessment for learning? What is the process of implementing the assessment for student learning? And what are the approaches of assessment for student learning and how to apply in the class? Before we proceed to the first talking point of today's webinar, perhaps it helps to start asking, why do we assess the learning of our students? I'm pretty sure you know the answer. And you agree with me when I said, we assess the learning of our students with a purpose. For this, I would like to recall with you the 3 main purposes of assessment. 1. Assessment for learning. 2. Assessment as learning. And 3. Assessment of learning. Let us understand better each kind of assessment. Assessment for learning happens during the learning process. Students understand exactly what they're going to learn, what is expected of them, and are given feedback and advice on how to improve their work. Assessment as learning happens when students reflect on and monitor their progress to inform their future learning goals. And assessment of learning happens when teachers use evidence of student learning to make judgment on student achievement against goals and standards of the school. Those are the 3 main purposes for assessment. Assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning. The first 2 purposes refer to formative assessment. They are being used formatively, while the third purpose refers to summative assessment. It is being used summatively. In short, assessment for learning and assessment as learning occur while students are engaged in the process of learning, while assessment of learning occurs at the end of the learning process or unit of work for reporting at the end of a time period, such as a semester or a term. With that short recall, we'll now proceed to the focus of this webinar, assessment for student learning, a formative assessment. We're going to describe assessment for learning in a detailed manner with the hope that we can apply that in our class to improve students' involvement and engagement in the learning process. Our first talking point is, what is assessment for learning? Assessment for learning is the process of seeking and interpreting evidence for use by learners and teachers to decide where the learners are in their learning, where they need to go, and how best to get there. This is essential teaching strategy during learning to help teachers and students evaluate progress in terms of understanding and skills acquisition, guidance and feedback for subsequent teaching and learning. The teacher's role is central in the assessment for learning. Through assessment for learning, teachers learn students' prior knowledge, perceptions, and misconceptions, and use this evidence to inform the curriculum planning and teaching practice in order to support students to operate at the edge of their competence. With this in mind, we'll proceed to the second talking point. What is the process of implementing the assessment for student learning? There are 5 processes of implementing the assessment for student learning. First, questioning. Questioning enables the students, with the help of the teacher, to find out what level of competence they are at. Second, feedback. The teacher provides feedback to each student about how to improve his or her learning. Third, successful work. With feedback, students understand better what successful work looks like for each task they are doing. Fourth, independent learners. Students become more independent in their learning, taking part in peer assessment and self-assessment. And fifth, summative assessment. This is in the form of students' exams, projects, or portfolio submission. These are used formatively to help students improve. This brings us to our last talking point, which focuses on the approaches of assessment for learning and ways to apply in the class. What are the approaches of assessment for student learning and how to apply in the class? Assessment for learning emphasizes the creation of a learner-centered classroom with a supportive atmosphere where students are not afraid to make mistakes and learn from their mistakes. We are going to explore the 5 approaches or strategies that you can use in your class. These are questioning, feedback, peer assessment or peer feedback, self-assessment, and the formative use of schools, tests, and exams, projects, and so on. 1. Questioning. Questions are a quick and important way of finding out what your students understand about a subject. You can use this information to plan your teaching. There are 2 main types of question: closed and open. A closed question requires a short answer, such as remembering a fact. The answer is usually a word or 2. Open questions need longer answers and often requires the student to provide an opinion. How to apply closed questions in the class? Use wait time. Give students time to think, to produce answers. Not everyone in the class thinks at the same speed or in the same way. Waiting allows students to build their thoughts and explore what has been asked. Give students the opportunity to articulate their thinking before answering. For example, who is William Shakespeare? Who is Vincent van Gogh? With that, allow silent thinking before any answers. Encourage them to write some thoughts before answering. In the closed question, use wait time to ensure the whole class is actively engaged. On average, teachers only wait like 0.9 seconds after asking a question before taking over from a student. Researchers suggest that increased wait time to 3 seconds improves the quality of answers. You can ask your students to write down the answer to closed question on a piece of paper, mini whiteboard or tablet, and hold it up. This immediately gives you feedback about who understands, who does not, and therefore, what the next steps in the learning might be. Also, good strategy to use if a student gets the answer wrong is to make this into a positive statement. You can say, Roberto, I'm glad you said that, as I'm sure lots of other students have the same misunderstanding. Now let's move to the open questions. How to apply open questions in the class. Bounce answers around the room to build an understanding and have students develop stronger reasoning out or misconceptions. Example, Robert, what do you think of Clara's answer? Mario, how could you develop Clara's answer to include the detail? Anna, how might you combine all you have heard into a single answer? When questioning, insert the word might to give students greater opportunity to think and explore possible answers. Example, instead of asking, what is the meaning of democracy? Say, what might the meaning of democracy be? The first infers a single answer known by the teacher, whereas the second is inherently more open. It allows students to think and to explore their own understanding of what democracy is. Also, when you have received an answer to a question, open up the thinking behind it by asking what others think about the idea. For example, you can ask, what do others think about Maria's idea? This kind of question will motivate, will encourage others to think more about the question. Ask students why X is an example of why. For example, why is an apple an example of a fruit? Why is a fox an example of a mammal? Questioning in this way avoids factual recall and asks for underlying reasoning to be made explicit. Open questions allow all students to try to answer the question and be part of a discussion. You can then facilitate this discussion, asking questions to develop the discussion, such as, tell me more about that, or why do you think that? In an assessment for learning classroom, finding out what learners do not know is as valuable as finding out what they know. This knowledge will help you to see what material your learners need to spend extra time on to make sure that they all understand. Second approach is feedback. Feedback is the process in which students come together with their teachers to discuss where they are in their learning, where they want to be in their learning, and how they're going to get there. It usually involves looking at a particular piece of work done by the student. Feedback can be described as the bridge between teaching and learning. The aims and objectives of any assignment must be clearly understood by both the teacher and the student. You can help by providing success criteria before your student start work. Feedback might involve marking. However, students may only remember the mark or the grade and not act on any comments to improve their work. In an assessment for learning classroom, a teacher will give comment on the feedback on their students' work. But oral feedback can be effective too. If you want to add a grade, give this later on so that students read the comments before they receive the grade. Effective feedback depends on task-focused comments rather than ego-focused comments. Let us try to describe each kind of feedback. Here is an example of ego-focused feedback. You would say, "Great work, Roberto. This best in the class." This kind of feedback can make strong students complacent, thinking that they do not need to do anything more to improve. This might also be scared or scary in trying to do something more that might be difficult, and they might lose their high place. Weak students can feel as if there is nothing they can do to get better. Task-focused assessment aims to provide feedback to each student that praises not only the task-focused aspects of his or her work, but also contains target about how to improve his or her learning. It consists of two elements, a praise and a task. How to use task-focused feedback in the class. This is an example. You would say, "Lucas, you have written a good introduction to your story." This is a praise. Now, can you think how you can make the description of the main character more striking? The task. Another example. "Eliza, your use of descriptive language was an improvement on your last essay." That's a praise. Can you think how you can describe the scenes vividly? This is a task. Now, another thing is you can use redraft in the feedbacking. Use lesson time to redraft work. This allows students time to focus on the feedback for improvement they have been given. It also reinforces the value of the feedback and allows them to work at it in a supportive environment. Reinforce the focus on redrafting and comment-only marking by insisting on seeing evidence of student correction on their own work. Give students opportunities to follow up comments. Create time in the lesson to talk to individual students. Third approach is peer feedback. Peer feedback or peer assessment is the process by which learners assess each other's work and give each other feedback. This feedback is based on an understanding of what makes a successful piece of work. The teacher is vital to this process, as teachers know their learners and can help them to develop their critical and reflective thinking skills. Peer assessment requires students to act collaboratively. Indeed, assessment for learning is a collaborative enterprise. Teach the students the skills of collaboration in peer assessment. Students will not simply collaborate and assess each other in a compassionate and constructive fashion. It is a skill to be developed and nurtured. Therefore, explicitly teach skills of collaboration. This can be assisted by discussing collaboration with students and making it visible as a part of the classroom. How to apply in the class. Prepare learning objectives and the success criteria and make it explicit and transparent to students. This will help ensure that students are able to identify when they have met some or all of the success criteria. Make sharing of learning objectives and successful criteria a regular feature of lessons and an integral part of reviewing the learning. Show to students what good work looks like, tell why it is good, and how to achieve similar standard, and how to evaluate and feedback on piece of work in an independent and effective fashion. Let students apply the success criteria to other learners' work. Let students give his partner ideas on how to improve the work. In doing this, they will both be increasing their own understanding of what makes a successful piece of work. Provide opportunities to do this throughout the actual lessons and schemes of work. A successful peer feedback session requires learners to think like a teacher for each other. The fourth approach, self-assessment. Students need to learn for themselves how they move up to the next level. They need to internalize the process. Learning cannot be done for them by the teachers. In self-assessment, a student evaluates his or her own work and thinks about his or her own learning. This helps the student to make sense of what the teacher says, relate to previous learning, and use this for new learning. Ultimately, self-assessment evaluates students or helps students to set their own learning goals and be responsible for their own learning. However, be aware that students cannot become reflective learners overnight. It takes time to practice and develop these skills, and the role of the teacher is crucial in encouraging the students. Students need to learn for themselves how they move up to the next level. So self-assessment will help students develop a sense of independence and self-evaluation. How to apply self-assessment in the class. Carefully guide the students in self-assessment process. Start with giving your students a list of questions to ask themselves and write down the answers. Starting a learning log or reflective journal is good practice. This is a notebook in which the students document their recent experiences, asking themselves questions such as, what made sense and what didn't? How does this subject fit in with what I already know? What did I do well and what could I have improved? Train students to generate their own questions and then practice answering them when preparing for exams. This makes students think explicitly about the underlying structures of assessment, as well as the material which they are being asked to manipulate for lab subjects, for instance, during the exam. Talk to each of your students individually to guide his or her thinking until the student feels comfortable with the process. Self-assessment is an activity which requires one-to-one tutorials to be fully successful. Ask questions to help your students to reflect on their studies. Allow your students to set targets to make their work better. These targets can cover any aspect of learning, from time management to asking more questions in class if they do not understand something. And 5, the formative use of school's tests, exams, and projects. The school's tests, exams, and projects are used to gauge the level of the learning process of the students. This can be used to direct the learning intentions and the learning context to move up the student's level of academic achievement. How to apply in the class? Return mark tests or exam papers to students on time, so they can spend time understanding where they earned most marks and where they had misunderstandings. After the exam or test, find out which questions were answered less by most learners. This will give you important information about what subjects, ideas, and skills your students need to work on. You can then focus on explaining areas of the syllabus that gave problems to most students. Your students could also rework exam questions in class or in pairs or groups as a peer learning activity. So also with projects, give comments on how to improve their projects. Tell students how they could improve their performance. So we have just finished our webinar course on assessment for student learning with the following key points: the principle of assessment for student learning, its implementation process, its approaches or strategies and ways to apply in a class. I hope you have learned something from this webinar and apply it in your class. I would like to close this session with some reflective questions or reflective thoughts, such as: how high a priority do you place on assessment for student learning in your teaching practice? How important it is for students to be reflected about their learning and take ownership of it? Do you believe peer assessment and self-assessment should be taught? What are some barriers you perceive to implementing peer assessment and self-assessment with your students? And how might you handle these barriers? I hope you take time to consider and reflect upon those questions and recognize the relevance in making the learning process of the students effective and meaningful for the students. That ends our webinar 7, Assessment for Student Learning. See you in webinar 8, Action Research for Educators. Thank you for joining us.